YouTubers, this is Joe from ArtAlienTV, and another quick game of interplanetary I Spy going on here, back on Mars, back in Gale Crater, and we're looking at a number of images here, but mainly this one, which is PIA 21853, Erosion Effects on the Vera Rubin Ridge, Mars. And we have this really nice set of images compiled from the ChemCam, which is in black and white, but they're really clear and high quality, and definitely better quality than the mass cam images we normally get. Now, before I do anything, I must give a shout out to a couple of people that brought my attention to this particular thing, namely Terry Burnett from who posted it on Mars X Files, which is a cool page, so check that out. That's a cool Facebook group, and pointed out this rather strange cross-shaped object on top of this ridge. There's also another thing stuck up next to it. But also, Seamus Green did the same on the same day, August the 25th. And there's a little comment somewhere, there was underneath there, but it seems to have gone. But basically, I'll give them credit for this find because I didn't spot this. They drew my attention to it on the same day. I do go on a lot of these Facebook groups. This was on Martian Genesis, which is also well worth checking out as well. That's run by Martin Graney mainly, and that's really cool. You see some great stuff on these pages, so I recommend both of these pages, Mars X Files and Martian Genesis. Okay, so full credit to both you guys. Thanks very much for bringing my attention to this. Now, this may well be natural, and in fact I've also got the Gigapan here, which is another really nice image put together by Neville Thompson. This was done a while back now. I don't know exactly when it was posted, but it was probably done a week or two, a couple of weeks ago. And added on the 25th, so he actually did it that day, and they probably found these things in his Gigapan. So really, we should be thanking Neville Thompson here for putting up this Gigapan on that day, and then both these other fine researchers managed to spot the same thing. And as I always say, the ridge lines are always interesting because there's often things sticking out of them which are very unusual. Now, a lot of this is maybe down to erosion, but when I show you the close-ups, you may think otherwise. Here's the actual main page that came out. Now, this was only published last night, and I recognised the cross-shaped object straight away from the Facebook posts a couple of weeks back. So I'll read out just quickly what it says here. This view of Vera Rubin Ridge from the Curiosity, from the chemistry and ChemCam instrument on NASA's Curiosity Mars rover shows sedimentary layers, mineral veins, and effects of wind erosion. This area of Lower Mount Sharp became a ridge by being more resistant to erosion than neighbouring portions of the layered mountain. Here, the wind has eroded portions of the outcrop in unusual ways, so that elongated rock fragments can be seen protruding into the sky. Okay, that sounds feasible and may well be correct. I'm not going to discount that because these things are down to interpretation, but when you see this up close, as I will show you in a second, you may think otherwise. Okay, so all these links will be here in the description below. I've even found it on the ChemCam page as well. Here's a good close-up of it, and you can actually see that pretty clearly. It's a little bit fuzzy. These ChemCam shots tend to get a little bit fuzzy around the edge, and you lose a bit of definition, but they're still really good, and they are nice and clear, just a bit kind of soft focus. And there it is. We have a cross-shaped object here and another thing sticking up. Now, the question is this natural? Now, it kind of looks natural, but when you get in close, it's got some very odd features on it, and it kind of looks a bit like, to me, a bit like a TV aerial or antennae or something like that. I'm not saying it is, I'm saying that's what it looks like. So, without further ado, let's have a look at the close-ups I've got here, and I'll show you what I mean. I'll show you the clips. Now, what I did, here's a raw clip. Now, you've got to let your eyes adjust here because this is a bit out of focus. So you've got to kind of squint your eyes a little bit. It might help if you move away from the screen a little bit as well. And what I did with this, I actually filled in this black bit here just to make it easier to view, because obviously I will be using this on the cover. So what I did is I cloned the grey sky here over that black section just so that I can make a thumbnail cover design for the video, and no other reason. I'm not trying to fake anything here. I haven't touched any of this detail whatsoever. I just cloned a bit of that sky over there. Okay, so there we have it. I mean, and even in the raw image, you can see that there's a straight piece here with angles on it, and it kind of comes through here and then goes through to here, and you've got a strange part here, and it almost looks like a TV aerial or something, but of course it may well be natural. And there's also this strange vitrified object here, which looks like it's melted down the side of this ridge, and it's very vague and a bit blurry, and in fact looks better when you get further back. Let me show you an enhancement. I've really darkened it up a bit there, giving it some contrast, and now you can see these structures here. See this? Really odd. Zoom in a bit. If you zoom in, it actually doesn't help, so I'll zoom back a bit actually. But you've got these. I've really pushed out the contrast, and you can see some of these details on it, like this rather strange light coloured part here and here and here, and there. Now of course this may well be metal, and there may well be molten magma that solidified in Gale Crater when it was full of water. As the magma came down after, say, a volcanic explosion, it could have hit the water and then solidified into long shards and funny shapes. I'm sure a lot of the animal things that we're looking at that look like animals are actually probably just magma that's kind of solidified in a very animalistic looking shape. But this looks more structural. This looks more like an intelligently made object, or part of an intelligently made object, like a mast or something like that, or an Ariel perhaps, that is largely broken. It's probably broken off here. This probably came out longer this side, and is obviously eroded. Now, the problem with their explanation for the erosion is the fact that the air pressure on Mars is very low. It's extremely low, in fact, and even though it gets very windy up there, with winds of around 300 miles an hour, they do absolute minimum erosion to the rocks and surrounding countryside, because there's not enough air pressure for it to actually do much corrosive action on these strata and various rock types and things that we're seeing here. So the explanation they give may kind of work in some ways, but it doesn't really apply to Mars as it is now today. Now, depending on your point of view, I actually think that Mars had a thicker atmosphere fairly recently, less than 100 years ago, and certainly less than probably 20,000 years ago. Now, most planetary scientists and astronomers will not agree with that, and they will tell you that Mars lost its atmosphere maybe millions of years ago, or even a billion years ago, and they will not admit that these things we're looking at are a lot newer than that. And of course, if you look at some of the skulls and things that I found and bones, they do not look that old. They look less than 100 years old, but are probably around the 10 to 20,000 year old mark, because they would survive in the very, very cold and oxygenless environment and not rot away and turn to dust or just rot away like they would on Earth. So that's my point of view, and I do think at some point in the future I may be proved more correct as we get more data, and as perhaps they are forced to admit, that there may have been life on Mars, but much more recently and not a billion years ago or millions of years ago. Okay, but that very much is my point of view, and it is down to the millions of images that I've looked at of the Mars surface and the observations of what looked like fairly fresh animal specimens and bones and things like that, as well as other strange objects that don't look millions of years old, but of course they may be, and it may be down to the extreme preservation caused by the temperature and lack of oxygen that we are seeing. Okay, so there we have it. I mean, that's about it really to see on this one. Let me show you the really bright one I've done here. I've really brightened that up, and you can see these shapes here, and this is a nice straight kind of piece, and it kind of angles along to there, and you've got a strange lighter part here. and when you kind of look at it in greater context, let's look at the gigapan here from Neville T. There's a lot of very sort of metallic looking wreckage, or I should say eroded material here, and I'm not convinced all this stuff is rock. Some of it's very angular, but of course a lot of this shale and mudstone does erode in very tight lateral patterns. This is caused by wind, lateral patterns going across. Water erosion, of course, would cause vertical erosion lines coming down, which we're not really seeing much of. So it obviously hasn't rained much in this area for a very long time. But I do think some of this material is actually metallic. It's not all rock. And there's another thing sticking out here, like a little piece. These may be metallic parts to something that was once perhaps part of a building or a structure or something intelligent. That is speculation, of course, and is my opinion. You may differ on that, which is absolutely fine. But there are sort of other parts to it, and maybe this was part of a tower or some kind of building or something similar. Who knows? And there have been other similar things sticking up from the ground and stuff on Mars that I've published in the recent years, like this thing. Now, I actually published this back in 2015. Mars electric fence post linked to Mars traffic light, okay? A lot of you probably have seen this already, because I did republish it recently. I'll just play that through a little bit. Now, I really cannot see how this could be a rock, because it's independently sticking up from the ground, from behind this rock here. And when you enhance it and flip it to negative, like I've done here, it's got an arm sticking out, and a round part to it here, and a body, a long sort of body to it. But something I just noticed with this thing, which I didn't really notice before, until having a re-look at it again today, there's a round object just behind it here. And it doesn't really show until you turn it to negative, like I've done. You can see that there, okay? So it's got some kind of wheel behind it. Let's let that play through a little bit. That's something I didn't notice before. It should come back to the image now. Right, now you can just about, now you know it's there, you can just about see it, but it's very vague. But there's a lighter wheel-shaped object just behind this thing, and it may be attached to it. So it may not, it's probably not a fence post, as I've called it, or an electric fence post. But that's the only thing I could find to compare it to in shape, because it has that kind of loop here twisted around. So this may be something completely different, but it doesn't look like a rock. And there's plenty of objects like this on Mars, including this thing, which was also published by me back in 2000. Hang on. This was initially published by me back in 2014, I think, or something. And I think was initially found by Rami Barilan, I think. But lots of people published this, and it kind of went viral. Loads of people got loads of hits from it, and it was called the Mars Cannon. I was the guy who got it in the newspapers. And there are some newspaper articles about this, which I can put links to below in the description with all these other links. I got it in the Daily Mail, and then it went viral, and sort of went a bit crazy for about a week, which was cool. And but another thing that really doesn't look like a rock, and if it's not a rock, then what is it? Because it really doesn't look like a rock. It looks very manufactured. It looks a bit like an SPG. Now this is in my video, Mars Mystery Object Collection, around the almost 9 minute mark there. But I have got separate videos with this in, which you can find as well. I think it was called the Mars Cannon or something like that. But there are loads of these weird things sticking up from the ground, and I really don't think they're all rocks. I think a lot of these things are manufactured and were probably once buried and have just become uncovered as the wind perhaps blew the sand away. And the wind on Mars is only just powerful enough to do that. It doesn't really erode anything anymore in any great amount, because it's simply not, there is simply not enough air pressure to cause the erosion. So is it possible that manufactured objects could survive for 1 million years? Yes, it is. If these were buried for most of that time, it's absolutely possible. But I don't think they're that old. I think they're less than 20,000 years old. Most of the things we're seeing, the buildings up on Mount Sharp are ruined, but they could be anything between 100,000 years and and 10,000 years old, I really don't know. The only way to really determine that would be to go there or get use of the rover and take some proper samples and go up to these things and go right round them and photograph them from every conceivable angle and take samples and do light readings and everything else, and that would be possible. But of course, NASA wouldn't even admit that these things are even worth looking at in the first place, so wouldn't do that. This is from the PDS image of that, and you can actually see it's more rounded. It's a much clearer image, and it has what looks like at the back end here and a sort of gun sticking out with a thicker part here at the bottom of the base, and it's kind of dug in like some SPGs or self-propelled guns on Earth anyway. They often have like tractor parts on them or jacks and stuff like that. They can actually jack themselves into the ground so that they don't move when they're firing, and that almost kind of looks like this. It's like it's attached to a base kind of structure or something. Very odd indeed, and it really does not look like a rock. Anyone that says this is a rock is, I would say, in complete and utter denial. I often get accused of pareidolia. Well, yeah, maybe some of these things are, but really, I mean, have you ever seen a rock on the beach that looks like that? No. And I used to spend much of my childhood beach combing, looking for fossils, as many of you probably have, you boys and girls out there. And the only things you see sticking up are bits of twisted metal, perhaps wood, and wreckage. You do not see rocks looking like this. But as for the one on Mars, this one, judging by the other structures around it, it could well just be natural. But to me, especially when you look at the enhancements that I've done, when you can clear it up a bit and make it a bit more bold, it kind of looks unnatural, and of course may well have been part of a structure, an intelligent structure. Is it an Ariel? Probably not. Is it a part of a building? Possibly. There are buildings in at Mount Sharp. Most of them are wrecked and ruined and half buried and are probably 1 million years old or 500,000 years old. Absolutely no idea. Impossible to say. But you know, these things are there, and it is not a crime to speculate on what these things might be, of course, although some people seem to think it is. So there we have it, really. I'll put a couple of clips of that in at the end, but there are some other images here which they recently released of the nearby ridge lines, which look really cool, really clear, large quality images. These are high definition, really nice and clear, and we rarely get stuff this clear from Mars. But sometimes the ChemCam is pointed at the background or the foreground stuff, and you really get to see this stuff up close, and you can actually see the strata here, very fine and complex strata going on, multiple layers of what was probably clay, mudstone layers that have been pushed together, but have also eroded over the millions of years. So there we go. So how long ago did the atmosphere really go on Mars? Is it like me? Do you think it happened when there was a nuclear war? Dr. John Brandenburg says that there was a nuclear war on Mars, or at least 2 devices were let off because radioactive xenon 129 signatures were found in the atmosphere, and this is weapons signature xenon. It's not created naturally, okay? So there's no mistake what that is. It is definitely from thermonuclear devices going off above the ground. And there are even scorch marks on Mars in the northern areas where these were let off. And the question is, how long ago was the atmosphere largely destroyed? I actually think it was much more recent. I actually think it was in 1941 when Dr. Clyde Tombaugh, the famous astronomer, saw a massive green explosion on the Mars surface through his enormous telescope, and would later reported this to the American military, who looked into it and then kind of didn't really do anything about it. So that's my point of view. I actually think it was much more recent, which would explain why a lot of these things don't look as old as they should. So there we have it, guys. Thanks for watching, everybody. Please share it on social media. Please give the thumbs up. It really helps. Thanks to Terry Burnett and Seamus as well, Seamus Green, for pointing this out and letting me know. Thanks to Neville T for making another great gigapan way before NASA actually made theirs. He did this on the 25th. NASA brought this out only last night. So he's a bit ahead of the game when it comes to this stuff, so keep an eye on him. Links will be below. Thanks for watching. See you soon.